This week we'll be talking about sexual orientation. I hope you have been enjoying the previous lectures, and I hope you have been thinking deeply about some of the concepts and connecting them to your readings. What is our agenda for today? We'll be talking about what is sexual orientation, why is it important, understanding some terminology. Remember, if we can't describe it using the terms that are used to describe it, then we can create misunderstandings that often can lead to even greater confusion. So my job is to give you the language to begin to talk about some of these issues. All right? What is minority stress and what are some takeaways? All right, a warm-up question. This is from my home country in South Africa. And I want you to think about what is meant by the term umuntu ngumuntu ngabantu, right? Which means I am because you are, or a person is a person because of other people. So let's think about this. What do you think this phrase mean? This is the actual philosophical foundation of South African society in many ways, right? So this is something that we grow up being socialized to adhere to. But what do you think it means? I am because you are. I want you to think about it. All right. What is sexual orientation? Sexual orientation is often something that's very controversial, something that brings up a lot of emotions, something that often people do not want to talk about. Well, my job, as I said, is to make you uncomfortable, to really to help you confront some of the complexities that you will face in your careers moving forward. Sexual orientation will be one of these things that will be a part of your life moving forward, whether you're teaching or you're not. Right. So what is it? Sexual orientation refers to an enduring pattern of emotional, romantic, and or sexual attractions to men and women or both sexes. Often people spend a lot of time talking about the sexual attractions when they talk about sexual orientation. But we have to understand that people are complex. People are more than just their sexual attractions. People have emotional, romantic, and or other attractions to different people, right? Sexual orientation also refers to a person's sense of identity, right? Identity. Now, we're going to be talking about gender identity in a moment. Okay? Gender identity. Remember, we spoke about this term gender, doing gender, how we socialize people to be men or socialize people to be women. Well, when it comes to sexual orientation, gender plays a really large role in how we think about these things. Okay? It talks about behaviors and or membership in a community, right, of others who share those attractions. Okay, so I want you to think about and keep in the back of your mind this word gender and how it relates. We're going to be talking a little bit more about it as the presentation continues. All right. Why is knowing about sexual orientation important? Why should you care, right? Firstly, as a professional, having been in the field, the chances of you either having a child come out to you or having a colleague come out to you is very, very high. Okay? So the question is, what do you do with this, right? Children do not care about policies, children do not care about rules, children do not care about, their different societies that they're based in. If they're going through something, they come to their teacher, right? Their teacher is their confidant. They share with you some of the sins that they share with the world, or the things that they love, the things that they enjoy, the things that they're embarrassed about, the things that they love, right? All these things. Children are untouched in many ways by the world. And so they may come to you and share with you some of their secrets, right? And sexual orientation may be one of the things that they share with you. And so what do you do as a professional, right? So LGBT people, we call them LGBT, and I'll get in some of the terminology, encounter extensive prejudice, discrimination, and violence because of their sexual orientation, right? Now remember, we distinguish between prejudice, something that you think, all right? So imagine this is a cloud, a thought cloud, okay? Right? But discrimination is an action, all right? Violence. LGBT people, lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender people experience the highest forms of bullying and violence in schools. They are one of the highest concentrations of suicide rates in the United States. Okay? So when that child or that colleague is coming out, what they call coming out to you, there's a high chance that they may essentially be close to suicide. Okay? So bullying, harassment cause LGBT students to drop out of school, produce low grades, feel alienated, and possibly resort to suicide. This is a serious, serious matter. And that is one of the very important reasons why we're presenting this particular lecture. Now, some terminology, all right? I use the term LGBT, plus, Q, all of these things, all right? Let me break some of these terminologies down for you. All right, so we have G for gay, attracted to the same sex, okay? L, lesbian. When I say attracted, obviously, in this case, men, right? Although some females may also identify, their gender identity might be men or women. Lesbian, a female who has expressed romantic or sexual attractions to other females. Bisexual, think about a bicycle. There's two wheels, right? So men and women attracted to both sexes. Intersex, born with atypical sexual organs. In other words, they're born with two biologies inside of them. Transgender, transvestite or transsexual, someone who, this is where gender comes in. I think I may draw this up here. Someone who identifies, or let me go like this, is born X, but identifies their gender identity. They identify as Y. Right? So you may have seen men, in a recent case, there's a person who is transitioning, what's called transitioning, who identifies as a man, but is transitioning into a woman because he identifies as a woman, or she identifies as a woman. Okay? So, Q is for queer or questioning. Queer is a term that the LGBT community has adopted. If you're not a member of the LGBT community and you use the word queer, it can also be used as a derogatory term. All right? Questioning are for those individuals who are going through the stages of identity formation. We'll get a little bit more into that a bit later. And plus, the right to self-identify. The LGBT community is made up of millions and millions of labels that people self-identify as. And this is just not an exhaustive list by any means. All right. So what are the stages of sexual identity formation? Okay. The reason why this is important is because students in your class and colleagues may be going through, or even family members may be going through some of these identity stage formations, and you need to know them in order to deal with them in your classrooms. All right. Identity confusion, identity comparison, identity tolerance, identity acceptance, pride, and synthesis. Each one of these stages has their own unique markers, all right? And they're in your readings. So this is just a summary for you. Now, identity confusion, I've created just a table for you. I'm not going to go through it, but I'm just going to point out some important pieces to it, all right? So, the key word here, perhaps green is not the best one, right, is turmoil. Identity confusion, self-explanatory. There's turmoil, right? Identity comparison. They examine the wider implications of that tentative commitment, right? Self-alienation becomes isolation. This is a very critical stage for young people. Very critical stage. The more isolated they become, the more dangerous it is for them. Okay? Identity tolerance. I'm not the only one. Sam Smith comes to mind when I think about this statement, right? Identity acceptance. It will be okay, or I will be okay. Often they will look for support. The transition is support between these two stages. And that's where you as a teacher will come in. Okay. Identity pride. I've got to let people know who I am. I see many members of the LGBT community being loud and proud, as they say, right? Or fabulous, as some of them will say. That's because they're in the identity pride stage, right? Where they want everyone to know their sexual identity. Okay. And they may even confront those who they see as not part of their sexual identity, okay? And finally, identity synthesis. The person integrates his or her sexual identity with all other aspects of their lives. In other words, they're not just the gay person, but they're actually the person who is a teacher in a school and is really good at this and this, and they happen to be gay, all right? Or they happen to be transgender, or they happen to be intersex. All right. Now, minority stress. This is something that's really, really important to understand. Okay. It describes chronically high levels of stress faced by members of stigmatized minority groups visible and invisible. Let me explain what this means, okay? When someone, I'll talk about the visible and invisible when it comes to minority stress. Minority groups around the world, right? When they are visibly a minority, right? For example, in the United States, African Americans. In South Africa, white, Indian, or colored individuals, right? We experience minority stress when we go into an environment in which we are visibly the minority, okay? But there are instances in which this minority status can be invisible, like in the case of an LGBT person, right? When they enter a public building, for example, they have to wonder about whether they reveal certain aspects of themselves and whether, if they reveal it, what response they will get, okay? So, for example, a classic example I use is one of my good friends who's a Republican in Texas. We went to New York, and we were sitting at the table with a group of friends. And when we were paying the bill, he said to me, he feels really stressed out because he doesn't know whether to reveal to my colleagues that he's a Republican because he thinks that they may be a Democrat, right? So he was feeling this huge anxiety, right? He was going through minority stress, okay? Now, for LGBT individuals, they may feel a sense of betrayal. Like, if I don't tell my best friend that I'm actually LGBT, am I betraying them? Am I lying to them? But if I do tell them, what will the repercussions be? Okay? Now, that minority stress can lead to long-term health implications. Over a long period of time, it can cause depression, it can cause cancer, it can cause alienation, and it can cause marginalization, right? So it's important for you to understand that students who are a victimized minority or a stigmatized minority, the stress that can cause has tremendous implications for their learning environment. Now, agreement versus acceptance. Many people may be watching this lecture saying, you know, I can't wait for this lecture to be over because I don't like to hear about these sort of issues. But the critical thing is to understand that you will be acting in an environment in which sexual orientation may become a factor in the things that you have to deal with. So, many people will say, I don't agree with it, or I don't accept it, all right? Now, the critical thing is that you may not agree with it, but you have to accept that it's a reality, all right? Because there's a lot of young people dying because of this. So we have to accept that there's something there that we need to understand, right? Issues around sexual orientation in the United States often cause reactions, as I've said. As teachers and professionals, you'll be at the foreground of these interactions. Schools and classrooms are where these things really come to the head, okay? Teachers will need to create safe spaces for all students. If a student is being bullied in your class for their sexual orientation and you do not intervene, you are essentially a bad teacher. You should not be in the profession. Why? Because all students, no matter what, should be protected in your class, right? Whether that student's being beat up for being black, whether that student's being beat up for being low socioeconomic status, whether that student's being beat up for being gay, all students should be safe. And you, as a teacher, need to make sure that that environment happens for them, okay? Teachers can refer students. Often teachers feel uncomfortable dealing with issues around sexual orientation. Remember, there are professionals out there for you. They're in your reading list. You can refer students to different places. There are professionals who can assist you. Okay. And finally, how we respond to students can and will change their life. When students come out to you, when they open up to you, how you respond to them and how students feel in your class really is shaped by how you interact with those students and the tone that you set in your environment. I hope you've enjoyed this. Presentation on sexual orientation. Please read the readings, and I look forward to the discussion.